Imagine a dusty town in North Carolina, the mid-afternoon sun beating down on rows of modest houses in Shelby, a place where many families struggled to keep food on the table and hope in their hearts. You pass by the local rail yard, where the clang of metal on metal echoes in the thick air, and you can almost see the faint silhouettes of men laboring in the heat. In one of these small homes on April 3, 1928, a child was born to a working-class family who had precious little to spare except perseverance. That child, named Donald Eugene Gibson, came into the world during the toughest days of the Great Depression. Nobody in the neighborhood could have guessed that this shy, stammering boy, grieving the early loss of his father, would someday pen some of the world's most enduring country ballads, songs so steeped in loneliness and heartbreak that they'd become the very soundtrack of sorrow for generations to come. Don Gibson was only 2 when his father, a rail worker, passed away, leaving his mother, Lily, suddenly responsible for 5 children in an era when jobs vanished and breadlines grew longer every day. She tried her best to make ends meet, but the family's world stayed small and often bleak. For a child with few social outlets, Don found communication daunting, partly because he had a stutter. He was so hesitant to speak that many townsfolk remembered him as a perpetual observer, watching from the corners of gatherings or drifting at the periphery of conversation. But something else stirred beneath that quiet demeanor. He discovered music, first as a faint echo from nearby bars or from neighbors picking guitars on porches. It wasn't the rousing, happy-go-lucky type of music you might associate with 1930s radio variety programs. These tunes often had a grittier edge, reflecting the raw sorrow of families trying to scrape by. Yet in that depth of feeling, Don sensed a lifeline, a way to express emotions his voice often refused to shape. He left formal schooling around the 2nd grade, a decision born from necessity and temperament alike. Those who remember him from that time say you'd sooner catch him hunched over a worn-down guitar or banjo tenor, plucking away an uncertain melody, than see him crack open a school book. Work was scarce for a kid with next to no education, so he spent his formative years drifting in and out of local textile mills. Whenever he finished a shift, he would gravitate to local bars where the jukebox might roar to life or a traveling band might pass through. He might have been shy and stammering, but once music entered the room, something about Don lit up from within. In a rare interview from the late 1970s, he said, "Music was my escape from silence," a brief phrase that resonated deeply for those who'd known him since childhood. It's as if guitar chords and plaintive lyrics formed the bridge between the bottled-up sadness he carried and the wide world that beckoned just beyond Shelby's borders. In 1946, at the age of 18, Gibson decided he had little to lose by chasing the glimmer of a dream. He joined up with a small-time group called Sons of the Soil, pitching himself to local radio stations as a guitarist and singer capable of blending the rawness of honky-tonk with a more introspective style. With stammer in tow and a trunk full of insecurities, he traveled to Knoxville, where WBBM took a chance on him. Radio back then was like a ticket to bigger stages if you had the grit and a little luck. Don was no natural showman. He wasn't cracking jokes into the microphone or bantering with fans. Rather, the heartbreak in his singing and the sincerity in his lyrics got under people's skin. The station gave him regular spots, and the shift to a more professional setting forced him to refine his craft. Even then, he started building what would become his signature approach: slow, melancholic tunes that spoke directly to anyone who'd ever felt forgotten, lonely, or heartbroken. By the late 1940s, the music industry, such as it was, had begun scouting raw talents in the southern states. Mercury Records showed interest in Don, impressed not so much by sales or fanfare, but by the haunting timbre of his voice, and the authenticity of his lyricism. He penned a few early songs, including one called Why Am I So Lonesome, which flopped commercially but raised eyebrows among industry insiders who recognized a potent new songwriting ability. Another label, RCA Victor, then entered the picture in 1950, signing Don with the conviction that he might blossom into a major star if given time and the right production environment. In those years, country music was undergoing shifts. Western swing and honky-tonk were popular, and the Nashville sound was just beginning to form through the efforts of people like Chet Atkins, who believed that by adding a polished, pop-friendly layer to country, they could reach a broader audience. Don found himself on the cusp of these transformations, forging connections with producers who saw in him a unique capacity for sad songs that could also cross over into mainstream markets. But the big breakthrough was still elusive. He'd record a track here and there, some fleeting interest would develop, but it never truly blossomed until 1955. That was the year Don wrote Sweet Dreams. At first it went mostly unnoticed, like a hidden diamond nobody had bothered to polish. But a few years later, in 1963, Patsy Cline recorded it, turning it into an icon of heartbreak balladry. Her voice, timeless and rich with emotion, found a perfect companion in the lyrics Gibson had penned. The track soared across the charts, becoming a staple in the country canon. By then, Don was already moving to new creative heights. The spark of confidence gained from seeing one of his songs catch fire, even if sung by another artist, fueled him to trust his instincts. A pivotal moment arrived in 1958, a year so significant for Don Gibson that it essentially catapulted him from a modest up-and-comer to one of the most important voices in country music. In a rare instance of artistic magic, Don wrote 2 songs in a single day, Oh Lonesome Me and I Can't Stop Lovin You. The legend goes that he composed them back to back, driven by an almost feverish need to capture the heartbreak and isolation he felt in his own life. He was known to be introspective and sad, even when socializing. It was as if every ounce of unspoken despair found a channel through his pen. Both tunes ended up in the hands of Chet Atkins, who recognized their genius and produced them. Oh Lonesome Me soared to number 1, won on the country charts, and it even crossed over to reach number 1. 7 on the pop charts, a testament to how heartbreak, when delivered in just the right melody, can speak to everyone. The track helped define the developing Nashville sound, layering Don's mournful voice over a gently orchestrated production that appealed equally to country loyalists and mainstream radio listeners. But it was I Can't Stop Lovin You that took on a life of its own. While Gibson's version was warmly received, the song found immortality when Ray Charles recorded it in 1962, blending gospel flourishes, country wistfulness, and Charles's soulful vocal style. That cover became a massive global hit, turning I Can't Stop Lovin You into an enduring standard performed by artists across genres. It remains a staple of heartbreak anthems, finding new listeners generation after generation. Even decades later, you'd hear it in bars, coffee shops, at weddings, in a strangely sad choice, and funerals, wherever someone needed a musical expression of longing and unfulfilled love. In a single afternoon, Don Gibson had given the world 2 classics, each forging a different but equally profound emotional resonance. With these successes at his back, Don's career caught fire. He joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1958, earning a spot on that historic stage, a dream for nearly every country artist. The Opry crowd took to him, not for comedic routines or flashy showmanship, but for the warmth and sincerity in every note he sang. He struck them as a man who understood heartbreak on a personal level, who could articulate the universal ache that binds us all together when love fails or loneliness creeps in. Standing under the bright lights at the Ryman, he occasionally fumbled words when speaking, but never when singing. The contrast was striking. As soon as a guitar intro began, Don's stammer fell away, replaced by a heartbreaking clarity that left the audience enthralled. The 1960s saw him become one of country music's premier hitmakers, a man who could write sorrow like a modern-day poet. He also had a knack for choosing or pinning tunes that resonated with the everyday struggles of working-class folks who often felt overshadowed by life's hardships. Tracks like Sea of Heartbreak in 1961 and Lonesome No. 1 in the same year cemented his reputation for capturing the ache of separation and regret. Though they didn't always climb to number 1. Both reached number 2 and became staples of the era, covered or referenced by subsequent generations of artists. Meanwhile, that earlier gem, Sweet Dreams, kept reappearing in new forms, sung by different vocalists, each bringing a unique spin to the heartbreak Don had etched into the melody. The number of covers soared, proving that Gibson's sad songs transcended the ephemeral nature of most pop hits. By 1972, he scored a final no, one on the country chart with Woman, Sensuous Woman. Critics might have argued the track was slightly more risque or modern in its themes, but it demonstrated that Don was not a relic of the 1950s or 1960s. He could still craft or choose music that stirred listeners' emotions. Over the course of his career, he released an impressive catalog of more than 40 albums, from the introspective Girls, Guitars, and Gibson, 1961, to homages like Don Gibson Sings Hank Williams, 1969. Each record provided a window into the emotional tapestry he carried inside, even if the production styles evolved with the changing sounds of Nashville. Alongside these professional triumphs, Don's personal life was marked by surprising stability in one area: his marriage. He met Louise Scruggs, a quiet but strong-willed woman in Knoxville during his early radio days. They tied the knot in the early 1950s, and despite the swirling chaos of fame, tours, and personal demons, the pair stayed together for over half a century until Don's passing. They chose not to have children, which might have been unusual in certain conservative circles of that era, but it suited them. Louise became a protective force, managing household affairs and helping shield Don's private struggles from the voracious gossip that often engulfed celebrities. She had a keen sense of business and a fierce loyalty that buoyed him through his darkest times. When Don's star rose, they moved to Nashville, the epicenter of the country music world, in 1958, just after he joined the Opry. There, they lived a mostly low-key life, low-key that is, for a man whose name frequently graced marquee billboards across the country. But public success doesn't always quell inner turbulence. Don wrestled with personal issues that threatened to derail everything he'd worked for. By the mid-1960s, he was increasingly leaning on alcohol and sedatives. The very heartbreak he distilled into his music seemed to come alive in his own day-to-day struggles. Legal problems began to mount. He was arrested for DUI in 1967, creating a scandal in an industry that liked to maintain a squeaky clean public facade. RCA, who had nurtured his career, grew frustrated by his erratic behavior and the negative press. Rumors circulated that Don was so racked by anxiety and depression he could barely handle the pressures of touring, let alone the ongoing expectations to produce new hits. He checked into rehabilitation facilities more than once in the 1970s, confronting the addiction that had become his coping mechanism. In a candid Rolling Stone interview from 1981, Don admitted, "I nearly lost it all." He was referring not just to his career, but also to his sense of self, and perhaps even the unwavering support of Louise. Yet despite the relapses and the turmoil, he always found a way back. For him, music remained the thread that kept him from unraveling completely. When he was sober, he could reach into that emotional well, pull out a lyric, and shape it into something timeless, an echo of the heartbreak countless fans felt but couldn't articulate. By the time the 1970s rolled into the 1980s, Don's chart dominance had cooled. He no longer racked up hit after hit, but he stayed active, signing with labels like Hickory Records in the 1970s and then MCA in the 1980s. While the mainstream edge had shifted toward newer artists, Don still commanded deep respect in the industry. Peers recognized that his songwriting had laid a foundation for the current generation. Fans who'd grown up on Oh Lonesome Me and I Can't Stop Lovin You stayed loyal, flocking to see him at state fairs, smaller country circuits, and occasional Opry appearances. He put out an album called Look Who's Blue in 1980, showcasing that he wasn't done exploring the many shades of heartbreak that had become his signature palette. His final performance at the Opry took place in 2002, when he was 74 years old. That night, he walked on stage to a crowd that understood they were witnessing the twilight of a legend. His voice, older and raspier, still found that unique plaintive ring whenever he launched into one of his classics. Perhaps the stammer emerged when he tried to speak to the audience, thanking them for decades of support. But the moment he sang, time folded in on itself, and you could almost imagine it was 1958 again, with the entire world discovering the captivating sorrow of Don Gibson's art. Recognition of his immense contribution came in waves. He'd been inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1973, an honor that recognized the staggering number of songs he'd penned, over 80 that made it onto the charts and countless others that found life through other artists. But it wasn't until 2001 that he received the ultimate gesture from the industry, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame. At the induction ceremony, fellow artists praised Don's melodic genius and emotional authenticity. Some singled out his stammer as emblematic of how music can provide a voice to the voiceless. The irony was that a man known for his timid nature and speech impediment wrote some of the most powerful lines in country music history. For Don himself, it was a moment of deep fulfillment, a sign that the boy from Shelby who had lost his father so young and never finished grade school had truly made his mark. On November 17, 2003, Don Gibson passed away at the age of 75 from heart failure in a Nashville hospital. He left behind Louise, his faithful companion of over 5 decades, and a catalog of songs that had become woven into the fabric of American music. The funeral was in Shelby at Sunset Cemetery, where he was laid to rest, not far from the old rail lines where his father once worked. But Nashville, never letting one of its legends depart without proper homage, held a memorial service at the Opry, featuring tributes from artists young and old. Ronnie Milsap delivered a poignant rendition of Oh Lonesome Me, the auditorium heavy with the knowledge that the voice behind so many heartbreak anthems was gone, but not the sorrow-filled magic he had created. In the years that followed, Don's legacy refused to fade. I Can't Stop Lovin You persisted as a global standard, recorded in more than 100 different versions across multiple genres: soul, blues, rock, jazz, pop. The universal ache in that title line spoke to the unspoken yearnings of countless people. Culturally, the song has appeared in films, TV series, even commercials, an odd twist for a track born from the raw heartbreak of a shy, stammering songwriter. Meanwhile, Oh Lonesome Me continued to live on in compilations and covers, Countless guitarists, whether busking on the street or performing at local bars, found themselves strumming those opening chords, reminding us that sometimes the simplest tunes carry the deepest resonance. As country music evolved, absorbing influences from pop, rock, and hip hop, one might fear Don's brand of stripped down heartbreak would vanish, but it didn't. In 2024, alt country star Sturgill Simpson released a tribute album dedicated to Don's music, reimagining classics like Sea of Heartbreak and Lonesome Number 1 with a modern flair. Younger fans discovered the name Don Gibson and found themselves falling into the haunting sadness of his ballads, realizing that heartbreak doesn't age. A wave of interest in his back catalog surged across streaming platforms. The streams, the new covers, the revived critical attention, none of it felt forced. It was more like a confirmation that sorrow, when eloquently expressed, remains timeless. He never needed a flashy persona, never demanded the spotlight through gimmicks. He simply offered a vulnerable heart, soared on the wings of a guitar chord, and let the world hear his deepest loneliness. And in so doing, he created a comfort for the lonely hearts scattered among us. Even if you don't know the name Don Gibson by memory, you've likely been touched by his songs, because heartbreak is a universal condition, and few have ever captured it with such gentle precision. That's his gift to us, the language of loneliness, transcribed into verses and choruses that echo through time, bridging decades and distance, reminding us that while we might feel alone, heartbreak is in fact the thread that ties humanity together. We can thank Don Gibson for giving that thread a melody that will outlive us all.